I'm Juan Jose Pocaterra. I am a tech entrepreneur working in urban planning and developing solutions for smart cities in Latin America. I guess that translates into a lot of trouble on my day-to-day, but it's actually really fun because I get to work with cities and local authorities to actually use technology as a way of transforming the urban environment and helping people get connected in the city. I love that actually people can come together in the city. I was mentioning before that what I love the most about cities is the fact that there's so much space in the world and we could actually be living any part of it. If you get to see the stats, basically the whole world population fits in the state of Texas, each with its own townhouse. Nonetheless, we decide to actually, even having all that space, we decide to live together and to come together to kind of create and generate new ideas and generate prosperity. So that's what I like about cities, that possibility is right there. Right now we're in MIT, in the Sandberg Conference Center. Beautiful place. I mean, it's just amazing, the view that we get here. And this is a lovely city. Well, actually, cities are a pretty interesting concept. I think one of the most important things and paradigms that we need to change is the fact that cities do not make poor people. Cities attract vulnerable individuals that are looking for a better future. And when they come into the city, what they look to do is to actually connect with where the economy is happening, where things happen. And that's where bridging or closing that gap through infrastructure, through technology, through innovation, through transportation is actually the way to go. It's how can we actually bring these people together to actually make it happen in terms of creation and ability to generate things for a positive impact on the city's economy. One of the examples I like the most, maybe because I'm a Latin American entrepreneur, and definitely I have kind of my heart for what happens in this region and in the emerging world, is the Medellin case. Medellin had the opportunity to innovate and become a city that, if we look at its history on the last 25 years, mid-90s, end of the 90s, it was one of the most violent cities in the world. And you get to see Medellin right now, which was named one of the most innovative cities in the world back to 2 years ago. And it was only because they understood that those vulnerable communities and individuals that were in the periphery of the city, which actually is what happens and tends to happen in most of the emerging economy cities, they understood that what they needed to do was create infrastructure so those people and the wealthier people in the city could come together and interact. And when that flow happens, creativity happens, innovation happens, and growth happens in the city. Our main challenge today is first understanding that the focus has changed. If we see growth patterns in the world for the next 30 years, we're going to see that urbanization is going to keep growing. But we're going to see that growth is actually going to happen in emerging cities in the emerging world. So we're going to see that, for example, Mexico City is going to be adding 22 people each hour of our lives for the next 30 years to cities, while London is only going to be adding 9. And we see Lagos in Nigeria that's going to be adding 70 each hour of our lives. And then we have places like Geneva, which is only going to be adding 7. So right now, I think our main challenge is how can we work in those countries, work in those cities where also most of the most vulnerable communities live. And we're seeing that 1 billion people live in slums. So our challenge is how we can make them part of the city interaction and part of the city's economic and growth. And those should be our focus for the next 30 years. Quality of life first, it depends on having creative decision makers that understand that they don't need to help the most vulnerable people in the city by transferring them funds or by transferring them direct social assistance. That works, but the truth is that what they need is to be connected, to be able to move around, to use the city services on an easy, affordable scale. And that's in the end what's going to improve their quality of life. And the numbers don't lie. The Medellin case is exactly that. It's a case of someone that understood that what you can do is bring culture, bring the possibility of moving around easier on the city, and that generates growth. I do think it's a matter of local authorities shifting a little bit their attention to local innovators. And that's what happened in Medellin, and that's what we are seeing in the rest of the emerging world. When local innovators and creators and stakeholders, which include the public sector, the private sector, the academia, even the citizens, when they come together and understand that they have to be a force of creation to tropicalize and kind of adapt solutions or create solutions that are adequate to their environments, that's when we see change happening. That's when we see transformation. And it's not hard. It's just a matter of changing the paradigm, but also changing the vision. And having that vision that if we can connect all those stakeholders and actually create that specific infrastructure that's needed, because in the end, if you get to see Medellin, for example, or Caracas, or another city in Latin America, they all have, similar needs, but different contexts. And we need to understand those contexts before implementing any technology or any infrastructure. It all happens in the end, and it all works in the end, only if those people feel related to that connectivity that's happening, and they feel related to that infrastructure that's put in place for them. If not, it's just going to be an amount of money that's going to be invested, but it's not going to be used, and it's not going to be an enabler for the city's economic growth. It first begins obviously by the decision makers and the technical teams that are in their position. They have the responsibility of transforming and changing the city from the public sector. They have to become an open enabler and an open way of actually bringing together the different stakeholders that I mentioned before. So if decision makers in the city, mayors, or the technical teams that they have, or the urban planners in the city understand that these are the new forces in urbanization, change is going to happen. And when they bring citizens together and they understand their needs and they kind of get to relate to the problems that they feel and they have, it's not going to be hard to actually innovate and create and use the existing technologies, whether it's driverless cars, or whether it's a metro cable like the one in Medellin, or whether it's actually a simple payment system so that people could get to afford more public transportation. Then those elements of technology, which can only and must be seen only as a mean and not as the end itself, will become an active change maker in the city. And citizens and people, vulnerable, wealthier, richer, or poorer, are going to start using those technologies as a way to come together, connect, and interact. What surprises me the most is the ability and the speed of change. That's what I love the most. When I get to talk to public officials, local public officials, especially in these countries where maybe the background, the formation, or the knowledge that they have of the process is not as deep as you can see in other parts of the world, they tend to be negative on their possibilities. They tend to see that it's really hard to make that change. But when you get to talk to them, you get to work with them, you get to help them see and have their own vision of the issue and the transformation, change happens really fast. It's a matter of having the will, the political will, to invest in the urban process and the urban growth, the political will to incorporate all stakeholders, even if it's through a public-private partnership, and using existing technology, but also technology that is created on a local basis, on a local environment, to make that change happen, and it happens so fast. We've seen it in projects in Venezuela, with mayors in Caracas, in Barquisimeto. We've seen it with public officials in Ecuador. So we are seeing that the emerging world is actually believing that they can build a more equal and a more sustainable city environments, and that's what we're going to be seeing in the rest of the world. And I'm positive that if they make the right decisions and they incorporate all these stakeholders, change is right around the corner. Nonetheless, the problem of scalability is sometimes it's seen only as a problem of money, of resources, of budgetary constraints. And it's a little bit more than that. Because even though that budget constraints exist, there are a lot of ways to overpass and overcome those obstacles that you can have in a city if you actually have people make the change on a local level, test it, understand how that test goes, have a feedback of that interaction that the investment that you're having, whether it's in technology or hard infrastructure or soft infrastructure, is actually generating in the city. And based on how you understand that process and that interaction, then it's when you scale up. If you were gonna come, for example, to a city like this, and you're gonna build this amazing bridge, huge bridge, but you don't see first if people are willing to use it, if the new technology that you're implementing is actually gonna be adopted by people, and you don't test it out there, it's difficult then to scale because you already have a lot of the costs sunk into that process. As long as if you change that way of doing things and you start to kind of do micro interventions, then you get to get that feedback from the people, you get to get that feedback from the city forces that are happening behind it, and then you get to kind of correct the way or adjust the way so that large scale implementation becomes accessible and becomes affordable. In our work has been that the secret formula that we've used is actually to speak the truth to the decision makers. If you're really open on the risks that they're running, on the possibilities of actually doing it wrong and failing, because that's another thing. Most of the time, our public officials and our city makers and planners are not allowed to fail. And that's not how it works. Everyone, if allowed to fail, can create a lot more, can generate a lot more growth, can actually innovate a lot more. And that's what we're looking for. So I think the secret formula is actually convincing and talking to them and saying, hey, change is possible. Change, if you're willing to make it, is right around the corner, as I said. You need to be willing to fail. You need to change a little bit all those paradigms and obstacles that are blocking your way. And you need to get out there and talk to the people that have the needs so that you can build a stronger and sustainable infrastructure. And focusing, in the end, in mobility, in transportation, like Medellin did, like a lot of the cities in the world are doing, like Mumbai is doing, is what's going to generate in the end that people, I insist, come together and actually activate all the city forces to grow in the future.